Calorie counting is probably the best way to manage your food intake, but it's surprisingly not necessary. For when you say that it is, you're implying that there are no other ways to acquire gains, which is simply untrue. So in this video, I'm going to dissect the complete topic of calorie counting and whether or not you should be doing it. So let's get started. The first point that needs to be stressed is the fact that calorie counting makes you 100% accountable for every food that you put into your body. In other words, there are no more guessing games. You're either succeeding in hitting that daily caloric goal or you're not. So if your objective was to hit 2,500 calories a day and you got 2,200, well, that puts you in a calorie deficit, and you know with 100% certainty that if this pattern continues, you will lose weight. Likewise, if you're trying to get a lower amount, but you somehow ended up in a 10% surplus, you have the information available. You know that you screwed up and it's time to change your approach. Or it couldn't even be about screwing up. It could be the fact that you are succeeding in hitting your daily needs, and you know with time that you're not having to worry. Whereas if you're not tracking your calories, you are relying on portion control, natural appetite, and habit, okay? Which could work very well if you're experienced in eating healthy and you know your body. But for those who are a little bit uncertain, or maybe they switched diets recently, this can cause you to fail. And this is particularly why a lot of overweight people don't really hit their objectives in terms of getting lean, because a lot of them aren't counting their calories at all. And they assume that they're in a deficit, but when you actually jot down the numbers, they're in a maintenance or surplus. Or some days they're in a deficit, some days they're in a massive surplus, and it kind of reduces the overall effect. So if you're trying to get the best results possible, no more head games. Just make sure that you're getting everything every single day. Calorie counting will get that job done. Another thing too is that when estimating, a lot of people think they're consuming more or less calories than what's actually going on. So some skinny dudes are like, man, I eat all the freaking time. I can't gain any weight. I have a super fast metabolism. But when you put in the numbers, they're eating like normal human beings. They might have a large amount of food in one quantity, but at the end of the week, or just at the end of the day, period, there's not that much food. I've had a lot of guys tell me, yeah, my maintenance is 5,000 calories and I weigh 130 pounds. Are you actually tracking that, or are you just pulling those numbers out of your ass? So tracking your calories will set the habit right from the get-go. So now that you know the benefits, let's talk about who doesn't have to do this, right? Well, I mentioned previously that if you've been eating clean for a long period of time and you know your body and you got the portions down and you eat relatively similar on a day-to-day basis, well, you don't really have to count necessarily. You can make slight estimations, or just, in many cases, appetite will take care of you, okay? It's the cleaner the diet especially. In fact, there are some doctors who say, don't count your calories. If you have to do this, it means that there's something wrong with the diet itself. Usually it's full of processed foods, or it's not as clean as it could be. And I tend to agree with that to a certain extent. I mean, if you're eating your natural diet, quote unquote, the best possible foods, and the appetite is regulated and everything, and you know what you're doing, your weight should maintain quite easily. And if you want to gain a little bit, you can just add some extra stuff, like say a little bit more nut butter. And if you want to lose weight, you take a few variables out, or you do more cardio work. So it does make sense that your instinct will take care of you if you have enough experience. And that's why I think you should start off by counting your calories. Not necessarily your macros, because I believe if you're hitting your daily needs and you're eating clean, you're going to hit that no problem. Like for me, it's always going to be high carb. I'm always hitting the same ratios. I don't have to calculate that per se, but I'll say you should start off by counting calories. Get the habit, make sure that you know what you're putting into your body, right? And after a long period of time, you'll get a feel for what good nutrition is. Then you could slowly stop counting. And if you do it right, you should be able to make gains, no problem. Now, some people would say, man, don't take the risk. Just keep counting all the time. Hey, that's on you. You could pull that off if you'd like to. But what I'm suggesting is that if you already know what these foods are, and you're tracking your weight, for example, or you're tracking your progress in the gym, and there doesn't appear to be any plateaus, well, then you're obviously not experiencing any food issues, and you just got to be accountable in terms of the training programming itself. So I would say the more experienced you are, actually the less calorie counting is required. And I'll give you an example. Let's say you've been using an app like Chronometer for over a year. You've pretty much memorized everything at that point. You know what the macros are. You know what the percentages are of the micros. You know what you're getting from these foods. And you could just make your regular dishes on a day-to-day basis. And the fact that you memorize everything is like, you can ballpark it. You know that you're in a good range. So it's really that simple. Once you have the habit down, and you have a good idea of what you're going to be eating on a consistent basis, your diet doesn't vary tremendously. And that's what I did for the majority of my lifting career. When I first started, I used to calculate my calories meticulously, including my macros and my micros and all that. And once I got used to that, I started just tracking the calories itself. And then I eventually switched to estimation. And then it went to the point where sometimes I wouldn't count anything whatsoever, or I would just estimate, and I knew that I was within that range, so I was fine for the most part. So I never had to be extremely meticulous about that. The only time I had to modify my approach is if I changed my dietary habits. In this case, following a whole food plant-based diet. When I first started doing this, I wanted to make sure that I wasn't getting any deficiencies whatsoever. So I started tracking my numbers on Chronometer, right? Just to get a good idea of what my caloric intake was, my macros, my micros, etc. And I did that for a little while just to make sure that everything was the way it should be. And it was. Your boy's not protein deficient, for example. I'm making some of the best gains of my life right now, okay? And I think I'm pretty healthy too with all the abundant amount of micronutrients and phytochemicals and all that. But that's besides the point. If you're switching diets, say going from low carb to high carb, you might have to start tracking again for a little bit just to make sure that everything is the way it should be. And then you could back off a little bit. Once you have the habit down, you know what the regular foods are, then you could cool it a little bit. You know that you're not going to be deficient or anything like that. So I think it really comes down to forming the habit and memorizing your foods and having a good idea of what portions are. And that's why like a food scale could be beneficial at first, right? But once you can just eyeball it, it's like you don't need the food scale. Like you could just grab what you want, put it in, and you know what the calories are just by looking at it because you have experience. You know, anyone who's calculated stuff for a long time, you can look at something and you have a pretty good idea, provided that it's not highly processed now, okay? You have a pretty good idea. The exception would be going to restaurants and stuff like that because they tend to use a lot of oils and filler, and you can get tricked with that approach. Like just a salad could be really up there in the calories. So restaurants can be fooling, so make sure to look at the nutrition facts on that if you plan on going out. Or don't. It's just a cheat meal. It's not going to harm you in that sense if you're not doing it every single day or whatever. But just be mindful of the fact that it really is about building that habit. And at the end of the day, if you form it, you're not going to have to count calories. So the choice is entirely up to you, my man. If you want to keep doing that for the rest of your lifting career just to make sure that everything is on point, be my guest. You're never going to have any nutrition problems. You're always going to be accountable. You're always going to be hitting your numbers. It is the best way, like it really is. But if you're annoyed of doing that and you know that you're already hitting your numbers without counting anything, you have a good idea of what nutrition is, your appetite's taking care of you, you have a good idea of what portion control is, you don't really have to count your calories. So I would say it's a preference type thing, and it depends how far you're willing to go, okay? But I'd say most people don't have to count their calories, okay? Especially if you're just an average recreational lifter and you're not trying to hit like the pinnacle of natty strength or size, whatever. It's not required to be that meticulous. So you do you, man. I think you can maintain a healthy weight without counting. I even think you could reach your genetic limit without counting. Real talk. But if you think it's going to take your physique to the next level because it really adds to that precision, that's on you, my friend. So I hope that this covers the topic of calorie counting. It's more balanced than what I used to say back in the day. As I evolve, as I learn more, my approach to nutrition and training and all that changes a little bit, you know? So that's my updated take on calorie counting. It's awesome, but it's not necessary. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Give me feedback down below, and I'll talk to you all next time.